But I think this almost like philosophical question, and now we have spent quite a bit of time on first principle. Let's bring that home now, even to what I was working on today, and a little bit why I'm late. So I've been working right now on topics of basically how do you set the 10x ambition in an operational setting, right? So we're talking about processes, we are talking about rethinking with data and AI, the way we have done things in a typical administrative process. Now we truly need to apply first principle ideas on very fundamental stuff. So how do you go about to manage a contract with a customer? How do you go about the stuff that allows, we are managing the contract, but someone else needs to sell it. And if you really look closely at what we've been doing and how our computerization works right now, it's an analog process in the end that we have done, perfected over 50 years. It's pretty good, but it's still an analog process that we are computerizing or putting things on top of like this. And ultimately now, if I go into the mindset, how someone says, this is ridiculous. How can you do 10x on this process? We've been trying to make it lean forever. Well, I don't really need to do it like that, because I realize it's the same data that you collect here that I need over here, and I realized it's just a bunch of business rules, and they're actually not even that advanced. They're not even that, knowledge-intensive business rules. So what if I automate that, and then use a combination of the right techniques, workflow automation, stuff like this? It is actually not rocket science to take a contract management process from 2 weeks to 2 minutes. It is really not, if you have the know-how, of course.
Yeah, and not only the know-how, but if you also have sort of the conditions in place to leverage. And I think the digital infrastructure is very good at that. It's sort of, once you go digital, all bets are off. In terms of what was the tried and tested truths of yesteryear. So how people tend to distinguish between digitization and digitalization, and they want to say, well, if you just stand up the same thing digitally, you haven't done anything, but you need to sort of rethink processing. I think there's a lot of truth to that. So if you think of not the easiest, but not sounding negative, but the simplest way of process automation is sort of screen scraping solutions. You replicate.
Don't use the term that I know you're thinking about, but I hate personally, so don't say it.
Don't use 3-letter words that start with R.
but so there's a lot of course, there's a lot of benefit from that. If you can move away the human from the keyboard or the mouse and sort of have this manipulate the cursor on the screen in an automated way. I mean, that's more efficient, but it comes up at this hurdle, or up against this hurdle where it's sort of you optimize or you make it lean 100% within the confines of the same constraints that you worked with before. But if you re-engineer the entire process, you say you don't need to click like that, you don't need to have folder structures like that, you don't need to have that, because you don't need to have the human in the loop.
No,
you don't need to make the process manipulation visible to the human eye in an understandable way in real time. You can just do it completely differently. Then you will have 10 or 100 times, or many times the factor of impact in terms of efficiency, potentially.
But I think now we're also getting into the real unleashing of 10x effect or automation or rethink first principle. You really need to rethink the infrastructure stack, because what you're dealing with is an application-centric stack where the application is in the center, and then you can do this scraping and putting a shell on top of that, but you haven't really gained anything. But if you rethink the fundamentals of how you do your data management and how data is the core center part and how you build platforms of use around using data, then you end up with a fundamentally different design.
Absolutely, and I think to turn this conversation, or to continue this conversation in the light of artificial intelligence, you can think of what Google did with the Go playing games. And when they stood up AlphaGo, and they began with this experience-based approach, and they basically taught the AI how to play Go based on all the thousands of years people have been playing Go, And it had access to all these great Go players, and it played against the experts, and it was reading the textbooks and the tactics and all of that stuff, and it was great, and it was successful, right? It beat Lee Sedol. And then Google went another way and said, well, let's not tell the AI how to play Go. Let's just say, these are the rules. Now you go figure out how to play this game the best way. And then boom, now it's impossible for humans to beat computers playing Go. Because some of the moves are just not in the textbook. It's not in the experience of the human field in terms of people having played it before. And I think there was that move, the hand of God move.
Exactly.
And so I think it's really interesting. I mean, when people talk about being data-driven, that is precisely rethinking and re-engineering approaches to or solutions to problems.
And don't just put like a coat on top of some existing process that does exist and try to make it stronger in somehow. It's like taking a goat and you just put a suit on it, or you put like robotic arms on a goat. It's still a goat. So you can only do smaller incremental improvements in the speed he can move, but if you remove the goat and replace it with some like a horse,
this is the difference between slapping data and AI or digital on top of an analog process, further go back to first principle and rethink now